Hi, my name is Sande Hart, and I'm the president of SARA, the Spiritual and Religious Alliance for Hope. On behalf of SARA and my cohorts in this series, Ann Smith and Pat Fero, I welcome you. SARA is celebrating our 18th year of interfaith sisterhood, community building, and seeking out new solutions to old problems that disproportionately impact women and girls. We do this by locking arms and conforming to the highest and the deepest value system of each of our respectful traditions. When we follow the root of all of those problems, we find the patriarchy that plagues not only women and girls, but all of humanity. And in fact, the two are inseparable. We are recording, but we will stop once we get to the open forum to further create a safe space to dialogue freely. Any mentions that I can link to will be sent to you in a follow-up email. This call is also unique in that it will spin off into a monthly call for intentional relationship building between women of color and white women. It'll be held on the second Wednesday of every month, and it will be led by Brecia, who you're about to be introduced to. An honor to introduce all of our guests today. Please know that the mere short introductions could never do them justice and do justice to their credibility and the body of their work. Please make sure to see their full bios on our website. Dr. Edith Lewis is an emerita professor of social work and women's studies at the University of Michigan. Her primary research interests include methods used by women of color to offset personal, familial, community, and professional role strain. This has included involvement in studies identifying strengths within the African American women communities. Reverend Maymette Ellis Dulberry is an ordained elder and servant leader at Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Ypsilanti, Michigan since 1999. She is a licensed professional counselor and owner of Courage to Change Ministries, a fivefold ministry of preaching, counseling, teaching, workshops, and mediation. Reverend Maymette is the co-founder, organizer of an interfaith, interracial, and intergenerational small group ministry. Brecia Kralovic-Logan is an artist, author, and advocate for creativity and women and for women, and founder of Women's Woven Voices, a creative life coach and the author of The Spiral of Creativity, Mastering the Art of a Spiritual Life. She founded the International Women's Festival in Northwest to honor women's accomplishments and highlight issues facing women globally, along with the Pebble Rebel Award, which honors women making a positive difference in their communities. Patricia Fero is the author of 4 books: The Other Side of the Door, Mining for Diamonds, What Happens When Women Wake Up, and Sacred Marching Orders. She's a psychotherapist and has led workshops and retreats for over 20 years based on her books, as well as other topics empowering women. And she's also available for speaking engagements, personal coaching, and advancing grief work. So now it's my thrill to invite Ann to our circle. Then Pat will take over and follow with some discussion, and then all voices will be heard. But now first, let me introduce you to Ann. She is a teacher, learner, mentor, coach, illuminator of divine feminine, advocate for women's equality and empowerment. She's an author and a community organizer. She speaks from 40 years of experience and co-founder and director of Circle Connections. And she's also a Millionth Circle convener.
Thank you, Sande. Thank you, everyone, for attending this most important conversation. So if we can see ourselves not in squares, but sitting around the rim of a circle, see ourselves that in the center of the circle is a candle. I'm going to open, well, first I'm going to tell you some of the circle principles that we will be using because they're really important. We honor that we're in sacred space, that we're in a sacred circle. We speak and we listen from the heart without judgment. You'll see that we're sharing the leadership. So the leadership between these 4 incredible women to speak about this conversation. We will offer, in our small group, we offer, when we're going to break into, we offer experience instead of advice. And we listen with discernment instead of judgment. And what is meant to be held in confidentiality, of course, is held in confidentiality. So I'm going to ring the Tibetan bowl. It is a call for centering. And I'm going to read to you this wonderful poem that I found by Alice Smith, and I unfortunately can't find out who Alice Smith is, but for me, it touches me. My whiteness feels like a weighty cloak, heavy laden with privilege and cross-stitched with unawareness. It was swaddled in my whiteness the moment I was born, but oftentimes it felt like I was wearing nothing, skinny dipping through life, oblivious to the blessings of life. I've been wrapped in security and cradled in a culture woven with threads of blatant bigotry and subtle oppression. I can never remove my whiteness, but the time has come to completely refashion the fabric of my inner world and the pattern of our outer world. Pat.
What a beautiful synchronicity that you found that poem for us, Anne. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was meditating this morning is that every single person on this call is here because they are committed and they care about the topic and they want to do whatever they can do to learn more and then to act in the most effective ways. So it feels magical to me to be here. And I've been thinking it's just going to be so much fun. So I think once I get over a little bit of nervousness, it's just going to be so much fun. So I think that what I'll do is start. I want to say a little bit. Brecia and I have met a couple times in our calls, and I'm looking forward, Brecia, to your sharing your story about what brought you to this work in a little bit. But what I'd like to do, maybe it's for myself, is talk about how I met Maymette and Edith, because it's such a special. I'm just so grateful to know both of them. I met Edith when I was applying for social work school, and she's just been a mentor and a blessing for me for so long, and I admire her so much. And Maymette and I met in our office, which now is no longer Maymette. We closed it Saturday because of COVID. And we, Edith, Maymette, Lauren, and I created a model of interfaith or interracial discussion that had some benefit and some lessons. So I think that what I'd like to do is just start with Maymette, if you're willing to speak first. It sounds like you have some thoughts about what you'd like to talk about today.
Yes, I'm prepared to tell a little bit about my story that I shared with the group. And then, yes, I have some ideas for going forward. So I'm going to try and put my story in the context of your theme. And I'm focusing on being anti-racist and the critical need for intentional relationships between white women and women of color by doing Hart work, H-E-A-R-T work. So prior to 1994, I was in the death throes of losing my soul. I was anti-white folk. I was extremely prejudiced, and I was in critical need of an intentional relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I was born and raised in North Carolina, as a matter of fact, near Lumberton, where the president is today, or will be. I drank from the colored fountain. I sat on the back of the bus. I waited all day in a colored waiting room in a doctor's office when my appendix ruptured at the age of 10. And fast forward 1994, I became disquieted with myself, my soul, and my relationship with God. And I was a hypocrite in church and out of church. I pretended to be a Christian and I raised my hand whenever the pastor asked for Christians to raise their hand. Didn't believe in all the miracles in the Bible. I was also at the time co-chair of a group at my son's high school called Understanding and Sharing Diversity. I pretended to like white folk, but in my heart, I was prejudiced. And then my hypocrisy got the best of my soul. And I just began to pray for more faith, to believe wholeheartedly in every miracle and everything in the Bible, for my heart to change, because faith in it was just quite frankly wearing me out. I was really in bondage to lies. And so on July 7, 1994, the day before the last day of a 7-day cruise with 8 other couples, I spent the evening on the top deck reading my Bible, digesting everything I could on strength and courage. And prior to the cruise and all during the cruise on that evening, I also continued to meditate on Psalm 27:14. It said, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. The next day, July 8th, around noon, while floating in the Caribbean Ocean on Great Stirrup Cay, which was the private island that belonged to the cruise ship, I went to sleep. And by the time I woke up, the currents from the tender had swept me from the shore. And when I tried to plant my feet on the ocean floor, they wouldn't reach. I panicked. I flailed my arms and my legs, and I just knew that this was the end for me. I stopped fighting and I just relaxed into dying. I recall the scriptures that I had read on strength and courage, and my heart kept repeating Psalm 27:14. And then I began to reflect on my life. It literally flashed before my eyes. And then I repented and I asked God to forgive me for my sins. And I prayed somebody would find my body, and I stretched out my arms and I waited to die. And I could hear my lungs gulp as they filled with the salt water. And the rest of the story was told to me by family and friends. 2 people came to my rescue, a white woman and a white man. Rachel Olivia got to me first, and she said she couldn't swim, but somehow she reached me and held on to me. Dr. Richard Cohen got there next, and he said he heard a voice say, go. He dove off the raft. He and his 5-year-old son, Devin, were on, and as he did, he caught a glimpse of his son in his red swim trunks flying through the air, but he kept on going. Now, Richard had been kicked off his high school swim team, but he remembered how to rescue a drowning person. So by the time he got to me, he had to persuade Rachel to let me go. She said we had bonded at that point. So when he got me in a position where my head and my feet were up out of the water, he said he wondered to himself, why am I saving this dead woman? He struggled to get me out of the water and thought at one point neither of us would make it. He heard a voice say, give me your hand. He thought it was the voice of the Lord. That we had both died, but it was somebody on the shore reaching out. So we had made it. He called out to his father, where was his son Devin? And his father pointed to the little boy with the red trunks. And then Richard proceeded to throw up. Miraculously, Rachel made it safely to the shore. On her way back, she grabbed the first man she saw, who happened to be my husband, Gary. Now, I was told that the lifeguards and the physician came to my aid. They turned me on each of my sides. Water came out of my lungs. They lifted up my legs, and I began to breathe with the help of the Lord. I had no mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I believe it was the Spirit of God that breathed life into me. I spent a week in Miami Heart Institute. The diagnosis was near drowning, seawater, possible early adult respiratory distress syndrome, or pulmonary edema and mild hypovolemia. I had swallowed 2 cups of salt water. My doctor described it as having sunburned lungs. And when I left Miami Heart, my lungs were 100%. So my journey from transformation to transformation, from the death throes of a lost soul to a life of salvation, from prejudice to learning to love everybody, from a hypocritical faith to building an intentional relationship with God, began on July 8, 1994. And the transformation from being prejudiced toward white folk began instantly, given that both of my rescuers were white. I came to see their role as an act of redemption, which changed and transformed my heart toward white folk. And Richard's adopted son, Devin, is Black. And just before my near drowning, I had struck up a conversation with Richard's 12-year-old biological son, who had actually pulled me around on my inner tube. Now, before that summer, I was vehemently against transracial adoption. But immediately after that experience, I reasoned that if Richard had enough love in his heart to come save this dead woman, who's a Black woman, he has plenty of love in his heart for his son, Devin. And who was I to judge? So having given you my background of where I've come from and my transformation, I just want to leave you with 4 steps to consider in your transformation journey to becoming anti-racist and building intentional relationships between white women and women of color. Now, I gave 2 examples of them in my story: reflect and repent. Okay, Sandy. Now, some of these steps are meant to do alone. Others may reap more benefits, rewards with an accountability partner and or a safe group. And so you have on your screen the steps that I have come up with that I hope will be helpful to you. So step 1, in your process, in your growth, in your transformation, reflect. Okay, well, I was nearly drowning. My life flashed before me, the good and the bad. And as I continued my spiritual transformation, I learned the importance of self-reflection, of looking inside and naming my sins, those behaviors that caused me grief and shame, and whether committed or omitted. So the first step I suggest that you do is to actually reflect on your past and your current sins / behaviors. What is it about you? What is it about your heart, your soul, regarding racism, white privilege that you know needs to change? What is it about you that has caused you and others grief and shame, either omitted or committed? What is it about your race that you know needs to change? So look at those past and present behaviors and write them down. The second step I would suggest that you do is repent. As I lay there nearly drowning, I asked God to forgive me for my sins. Now, the biblical definition of repent means to turn away from. It means to be sorry, but also to turn away from. So to turn from my wicked ways from me and turn back to God. And thankfully, he gave me another chance to get it right. The second step is for you to ask God or whomever is your higher power to forgive you for those sins, behaviors that you wrote down in step 1. And I suggest you write a prayer or a pledge or some type of an affirmation of forgiveness to repeat at least daily. For me, the sum of 1994 was Psalm 27:14, wait on the Lord. The third step that I would suggest you do is redeem. And redeem just simply means to buy back, to recover, to fulfill a promise. One step of redemption for me came in the form of confession before my church family, admitting that I was a hypocrite. Other forms of redemption came in the form of me reading and meditating on God's word with a different lens of faith and trust. And I learned how it was to be, how to become, not so much how to act. If I was to redeem myself in the eyes and the heart of God, I had to be a different person. I had to have a pure heart. I had to love everybody. I had to love my neighbor as myself. I had to treat everybody right, like I want to be treated, regardless of the color. And I had to learn how to forgive my enemies. So redeeming myself was accelerated when I went to seminary in 1999. I read a book called Inside Out by Dr. Larry Crabb. It actually changed my life, transformed me. And I suggest that maybe perhaps you get that book. That has a workbook with it as well. I was moved to an act of redemption with my family of origin. We're not huggy people. We're not people to say I love you real quickly. But as a result of my transformation, I remember one Christmas, we were in South Carolina at a timeshare on vacation. And I just suggested to the family that why don't we start saying that we love each other? And my father was so excited. And it actually took him years before he could actually do that. But nevertheless, for me, it was an act of redemption for my family. After I finished preparing this presentation, I actually found some information on a Dr. Amanda Kemp, and she's written a book about racial justice and mindfulness. Some of you may be familiar with her, so I would recommend that you might want to take a look at that. Then another act of redemption came when I met Pat, and she kind of talked about that. That was in 2016 after the presidential election. I felt I needed to do more to bridge the racial divide. And that's when we got together and came up with the idea for a group. I was actually asked to preach a sermon on white privilege at Lawrence Church. And I told them immediately, I am not preaching a sermon on white privilege at your church. I said, we can get together and have a conversation. And now that conversation grew the Listen, Learn, Love group. So I would suggest that you write a vision of your redeemed self, okay? That you, as an anti-racist, okay, your vision of a redeemed self as an anti-racist, as a sincere friend of Black and Brown women. What old values will you keep, and what new attitudes do you want to incorporate? Are you able to confess and apologize for your past racist and privileged thoughts and behaviors to your family and friends? To Black and Brown people, are you able to apologize to Black and Brown folk? What your ancestors did to them? Are you able to apologize to Black and Brown folk for the sins of your ancestors and of those living today for their sins against us? Step 4, and then after you reflect, after you repent, after you redeem, comes the reward. So for me as a Christian, while I'm on this side of Jordan, it's things like being set free from a burden of hypocrisy, free to live in truth, being faithful, developing loving relationships with 4 white women from the Listen, Learn, Love group, having white folk in my home for the first time for dinner. And then on the other side of Jordan is the reward of eternal life. So for step 4, I want you to write down what you believe the rewards are for moving through the 3 steps toward transforming your hearts, toward becoming anti-racist and building sincere, intentional, loving relationships between white women and women of color. I want to leave you with a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He says, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. One more quote for you. So in biblical terms, Jesus put it like this in Matthew 25, 31 through 46, when he was talking about the final judgment of all people, he says, in the end, we will be separated like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goat. The sheep will be at the right, the goats will be at the left. And he'll tell the sheep to come on in. They have inherited the kingdom prepared for them. He says, for I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me. And they will be puzzled and ask him, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And he said to them, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. And then to those on the left whose souls were lost, he sentences them to eternal damnation, telling them they didn't feed him when he was hungry, or give him a drink when he was thirsty, or invite them into his home, or clothe him, or visit him when he was sick and in prison. And they say to him, but we didn't see you like that. And he will tell them that when they refuse to help the least of these, that they were refusing to help him. That ends my presentation.
I think I'm next, right? I think I'm a moderator here. So,
yes.
So here I am. Well, Maymette, I never have heard you preach. I've wanted to hear you preach. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. The women who chose to be on this call are so lucky, are so gifted. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And so now Edie, of course, is next. And she had the nerve to ask me, did I want to go after her? I'm like, Edie, no.
You're right about that.
So I talked about the heart work, and Edie's going to talk about the hand work. Yeah, and the head work. So thank you, group, for inviting me. And I do hope that something I've said will make a difference. Thank you. Bless you.
How does one follow Maymette Dulberry?
I don't know.
How does one do this? Oh my goodness. It's an amazing opportunity. I'm really grateful to be with all of you. I wanted to pick up her theme of heart work, not just head work, and share a couple of stories. But I'm over here being the amen corner, Maymette, so it's going to take me a minute. come in with the rest of you. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to be with you today, because I know that there are people in various stages of this movement toward understanding and opening selves to working across differences. Some folks like Anne, who I was pleased to meet as a result of this, has been at it for more than 40 years. For some of us, it's much newer, but we're all just walking each other home, as Ram Dass used to say. What I thought I'd do is try to impress upon you that this is not going to be done overnight. That's my first thought. It's not going to be done overnight. For most of us, it has been done as a lifetime of work. I had to begin to think about these things. And when I was 5 years old and somebody spit in my face at the groceries at coming, I was coming into the grocery store and the man was coming out of the grocery store and he didn't think I should be there. So he spit in my face and I had to go home and ask my mother, why did this man spit in my face? And so the learning parts have come over. I'm 71 now. That was a long time ago. Have come over many, many years. But I'm committed to the work, and particularly to the work with all women of color, because I've learned to find the relationships and the similarities in our life stories. Brecia said something to me before we started this about a book I had recommended, cast by Isabel Wilkerson, and I recommend it to all of you all. And I recommended it because she tells the stories of so many people. This is not new. This is so many people's stories. And if we are to join with folks, then we are to join with the people, for example, my Latinx friends who are heartbroken because and trying to chase down those 525 or 545 children's parents in different parts of in different countries whose children were taken away. And my Asian friends who can't come out of their houses because people are cursing at them on the street and they feel for their safety. For my Native American friends who are dying in the Dakotas right now because they don't have access to medical care, as well as to African American friends for whom our stories are legendary and very painful. So I want to share with you the one of the principles, one of the experiences that has really shaped my life, particularly my life as an adult. I was lucky enough when I was in my 20s as an undergrad to work with some incredible Native American scholars. John Redhorse was a social worker who did just a lot of wonderful work on understanding Native cultures as and how one practices with Native peoples. Ada Deer, who was also, when I was a graduate student later on, and had been head of the Menominee Nation, took me under her wing and mentored me as a master's student. And I learned so much from both of them. But one of the first things, and this is a principle I want to leave with you today, it's called the principle of non-interference. It's very easy when one is doing this work and when one is feeling called to do work across different groups. It's very easy to want to just jump in because you have something to offer. That only works when you've been welcomed. And we're not always welcomed. We're not always able to just walk in the door and say, here I am, I have this degree, I have that degree, I have that set of backgrounds, I've done this work over here, I've done the work over there. That's not how we get people to respond to what we're doing. Instead, one of the things I learned from I'm sorry, from Ada and from John, was to sit outside the circle. One of my first experiences as a new social worker was to work in Minnesota, which at the time was emptying the reservations of all the young people. And those young people had been in boarding schools and in places where all they learned to do, if they were men, they learned to be mechanics. If they were women, they learned to be seamstresses. Well, the Twin Cities could only absorb so many seamstresses and mechanics. So the number of people being incarcerated in the Native American population was very large at the time. And I was working with a program to help people get out of jails and prisons in the state of Minnesota. I learned that even though I had some skills as a young person, my role was to sit quietly and be present at meetings and not add anything until I was asked to bring myself into that circle. Until I was asked. That doesn't always happen overnight. Here's an example. Years and years later, I wanted to do some work in a community here in this state, in the state of Michigan, with low-income women. And I had a project that I thought would be useful because it was born out of my experiences growing up as a poor kid and trying to figure out ways in which we build communities and build networks. So I wanted to do the work, and I sought out a community center where there were a range of low-income women who had children, and thought that I could do the work there. And so I went to the community, I sat outside the circle, and eventually I was told that what they needed was Art Start for toddlers. You are talking to someone who has absolutely no artistic talent, none. Brecia, I appreciate you. None, absolutely none. However, for a year, I did Art Start with toddlers every week. What ended up happening a year into this, I offered a workshop and said, would you all be interested? And all the women signed up. But what they said to me were two things. First, you're not an educated fool. Thank you. And secondly, you were able to work with the children, so we're going to give you a chance. That group went on to do phenomenal things. They were written about in local papers. They changed the ways that organizations and bureaucracies worked in this area. They became nationally known, and other groups followed the model that we had set up and that they moved forward. That's the principle of non-interference. That's if you really do want to do this work and make these connections and be with other people, particularly other women of color, you're going to have to spend the time unpacking, sitting out, and having people give you feedback. I had the opportunity to do some work in the 80s in Germany. I spent a couple of summers there with feminist organizations who couldn't understand why feminism in the United States worked the way it did and excluded people. Why the feminist organizations didn't include men, didn't include people of color, didn't actually work at reaching out. And so I had lots of long, really interesting conversations with German women who were disenfranchised when if they happened to partner with a person who wasn't from the country in the early 80s, they lost their citizenship. Their children had no citizenship. They were outsiders in the country that they had grown up in. They had to learn how to organize themselves, learn how to build relationships with not just the power brokers, but with other people of color who were facing similar circumstances in the country. And they moved on. The laws were changed. They became full citizens. Their children are citizens, and they became a really incredibly powerful voice and a set of change agents. Starting where people are, starting out from the outside of the circle, actually provides you with much more information than you have if you start from the inside. Um, the second piece I think I wanted to leave with you all was the importance of working across with multiple populations of color. So where is how many activities do you just normally engage in, like this one, where there are folks of color? Where do you go where there are already people of color? And sometimes you just have to sit outside of the circle and just listen, but you learn things that way. I had a couple of these, what kinds of programs, articles, workshops, intergroup dialogues, discussion groups can you be a part of that where the issues are affecting people of color? And you can sit outside the circle and learn. And then how do you use this principle of non-interference in your own work, in the way you think about things when you pick up a newspaper article and step outside of the way it's printed? Here's one of my favorite stories. For 14 years, I brought people to Ghana, and I've been going to Ghana for 25 years. It's home. It's my second home in West Africa. In the mornings, what people would do, because nobody could afford a bunch of newspapers, so everybody would go down to the newsstand, and 10 people would show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and everybody would buy a newspaper. You put in 2 CDs, you get a newspaper. We'd get different newspapers. Then we'd stand down there. Everybody would read the story that was supposedly the same story. And then we would talk about what the differences were in the story that we learned. That's how we gathered information. That's how we built information and shared it with others, because we said, okay, the 10 of us were at the newsstand this morning, and this is what the graphic said about it, and this is what the news said about it, and this is what the daily said about it. And we were building community. Now, some of those people I actually still can see when I go to Ghana. And we're all old now. That started in the 90s. But just that piece of being together in circles wherever you can find them and sitting out until you're invited. So I want you to think about how you listen and learn to build communities and to learn from people who are different from you. And you'll never know. I think I've said this to the steering committee before. You'll never know how much the simplest of things will make a difference. Pat Fero is always telling me things that I did for her that I don't remember. She says it and I go, I don't remember that. Because it's an exchange, folks. It's an exchange. So I'm asking you to use heart as well as head, to sit outside of the circle, learn from others, and wait until you're invited in, and then make your contributions if they're warranted. I'm done.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you so much, Edie. I think what feels like a really nice segue is Brecia. I'm going to say a little bit before I ask you to if you would speak, but if you would speak a little bit about what brought you to be so invested in this work. And it's a beautiful story, and I think we all have our own reasons, and that might help us. That might help us move forward into what we white women of privilege are doing here, why we're here, and what motivates us to be as passionate as we all are about wanting to do what the woman in that poem talks about. So, so Brecia, will you share your story that you shared with us about how you came to begin immersing yourself in understanding white privilege?
Absolutely, of course. So first of all, just starting from the very beginning, and that poem that you read, I felt very resonant with it because I just feel like I've been wrapped in my whiteness, in my cocoon for a very, very, very long time. And I feel like I'm beginning to emerge a little bit and change the inside and hopefully affect the pattern on the outside. Maymette, I just love what you shared with us, particularly that, you know, you're talking about we have to work on our own heart. And I love that you said visualize what you're going to be like as an anti-racist. That's so powerful. And also the redemption of, you know, what are you gonna do? How is that gonna manifest in your life? So that's a great call. And I'm in the place of listening and learning today. So thank you, Edith, for saying that, you know, don't just jump right in. There's a lot of work to do. And I know that reading books isn't a substitute for taking action and becoming involved in groups, but I feel like as where I'm at, just giving myself as much input as possible so that I can continue to really learn and immerse myself, because I grew up in a situation where I wasn't around. Well, let me correct that. I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, surrounded by Native American people, and yet in my bubble and not really interacting with them. So in a really strong culture in Scottsdale, the most western town, I went to school with no Black people, children. My church, there were no Black people. The grocery stores that I went to, there were no Black people. I just was in a complete world of whiteness. And what I shared before is that my passion about this work now comes from the fact that my daughter married Kyrie Henderson, a Black man, and at their wedding was the first time that I actually met Kyrie's mom. And Tanya pulled me aside and said, "Walk with me," and was very, I'm so grateful to her. She was so honest and basically said to me, "You have no idea what it's like to be Black. You have no idea what it's like to be the mother of a Black son." And she shared her concerns with me about her son being married to my white blonde-haired daughter. She shared her concerns with me about our differences, because we certainly have differences in lifestyle, differences in, we have religious differences. We have a lot of things that could separate us. And she had many fears, many hopes, and she shared them with me. And I was just there saying, "Oh, you know, the kids are getting married. I'm so excited. This is so wonderful." And it just shifted the entire thing for me, essentially anointing me into becoming a better person for my new family, for this beautiful new son that I had. And with my new son, his mother and his father and his brother and his sister and my whole new relationship to their family just completely shifted my thinking. And so from there, you know, I had luckily, I have three incredible children who I think have been more aware of, just they're very much more conscious than I have been as I was growing up. And so they feed me and help me to expand the way that I think and the way that I learn and the way that I listen. And it's really that, back to that poem, it's really, I just really feel like I have been in a cocoon. And I'll tell you, not that I haven't been aware, of the way that Black people and white people have interacted and historically, but I was just saying to Edith, I was reading the book Caste, and the stories that the author tells just have kind of reawakened and reopened my my heart, my spirit, she's intellectually challenging me to think differently. And I just feel baby steps, right? So just seated in that place of learning, listening, I know that when I go to Unity Church, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. If there's going to be changes in the world, let's be the change that we want to see. So I just feel that responsibility. And I was saying to Edith, it's painful and challenging, and also so important. And I feel really passionate about it, because you have to get through the phase of like, oh my gosh, look at all of the pain that my whiteness may have caused other people. And then I have to get through to the vision of, well, what am I going to be like in the world that's going to change that, create that within myself so that I can do the redemption that Maymette spoke about. And it's a continuing journey. So I'm just so grateful to be here and be sharing with you all, and to continue this and to continue it on. So so that my learning can move into that actions phase. I want to walk down I want to put my arm in arm with Tanya, Kyrie's mom, and just be able to feel like she and I can walk together. That's what I'd like. So.
Beautiful, Brecia. Beautiful. A lot of tears. I feel like what I want to do is, once we get this recording, I just want to watch it over and over, and I want to take notes, and I'm sitting here and thinking, what in the world am I going to say? But I am pretty good at listening internally. And so a couple of things have come up for me that I want to share. The first thing that rose up for me intuitively is a line from a song Buffy St. Marie wrote, of course, titled, "My country, 'tis of thy people you're dying." And one of the lines in the song is, with a lump in your throat and a tear in your eye, can't you see that our poverty's profiting you? And there are other, extraordinary lines in that song. I won't try to remember the others. But what I was thinking was, as we're looking at white privilege, what is coming to me is, can't you see that our oppression is elevating you? And Marilyn Nyborg organized some calls quite a while ago, and one was done by Nina Simons. And we were talking about, it was women's issues, it was Gather the Women. And Nina said years ago, what we really need to talk about is white privilege. And she spoke to us about she spoke to us about white privilege. And I think that as we do, and Sande and I do our Death Throes of Patriarchy, we have to, us white women, have to include ourselves as oppressors. Thanks for nodding your head, Edie. You know, so this has been, I want to be awakened. I want to learn more. And I feel so activated and so inspired. And I prayed that this call would be guided, and it's so powerfully guided. And I believe that we have a beginning here, a seed here that can be very, very valuable. And I'm just enormously grateful for what's happening here today. So, do you know, Edie, I got to ask you this in kind of a subtle way because everybody's listening. But I heard a story when you had, I'm going to be real vague, when you had your incident in Chicago, and one of the social workers, I want to say Nan somebody, called the Chicago hospital and spoke to them. Do you know what I'm talking about?
You talking about my brain surgeries?
Yep.
Okay. Actually, that was in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And okay, I'm trying to figure out which part of this you want.
Yeah, I can tell the story.
Okay.
From the way that I remember it, because I never forgot it.
If you're wrong, darling.
Okay, do that. Okay, so here's the story the way I heard it. I never forgot it. This precious woman that you're all able to be at the effect of today, I had was it an aneurysm or a stroke?
I had two brain aneurysms, and one of them ruptured while I was at a conference in Milwaukee.
Okay. And Edie is Black, in case you guys hadn't noticed. So what one of the social work professors did when Edie was in the hospital in Milwaukee is she called, I don't know who she talked to, but she threatened the hell out of them. And she said,
it was the provost who called every day, and said, "This is Professor Edith Lewis. You do not do bad things to her," because the hospital here in Michigan had absolutely not taken care of me. They had let this bleed go on for months without doing just a simple CT scan. If the CT scan, this is, the disparities, the health disparities that you hear of are not over there. They're right here. So I had gone for months, and they would do everything else except the CT scan. Had they done the CT scan, they'd have seen the bleed. The first thing that happened when I got to the hospital in Milwaukee was they did the CT scan and said, "We're taking her to surgery. She's got a brain bleed." And I was there for a month. But my provost, who knew what it was like to have to make connections because she had to cross bridges herself over time, and this is a white woman, all right, knew also how health disparities worked. So she called that hospital every day. I was at a conference, and the people who were running the conference, because I'm well connected and a legacy member of this organization, they showed up every day. At some point, the doctor said, "Would you still stop sending all these people over here? I'm bonkers, y'all. Brain surgeries and things coming out my head." I didn't know, but they kept saying, "You have people coming over here all the time." That's what it means to be an ally. That's what it means to show up and sit outside that circle. They didn't have to say anything, even though some of them did, but just to be there made all the difference in the world. All right, I'm going to be quiet, Pat. I hope that's what you want.
That was exactly what I wanted. And I was thinking about this, Edie. Did you work with Madison Foster when he taught there?
Madison was one of the people who talked to me about taking that job, but he was gone by the time I got there.
Okay. So Madison was a friend of mine, he helped educate me about that disparity in health education, and always made a point. I should remember the name of the disease, and that's because of my age. I can't remember the common. It's more common for Black people.
Hypertension.
Say it again.
Hypertension.
No, not hypertension. No, at any, it doesn't. He had a chronic disease, and he was so adamant. You explained to me how adamant he was anytime he went into the hospital that they knew he was Dr. Madison Foster, who taught at University of Michigan. That had to happen whenever he had to go to the hospital, and that was an education for me. Yeah.
Could I add this one last piece about that?
Of course.
The consequence of not doing that, at the same time that I had my aneurysms, I knew of 4 other African Americans who also had aneurysms at my University of Michigan hospitals. The other 3 died. The other 3 died because they didn't do things like look for a second aneurysm. If you had it in one place, there was likely to be a corresponding one in another place. They didn't look. They didn't catch the aneurysm early enough. And so the other 3 people died. I am aware of what a miracle my life is. And it was because, again, like Maymette, white people stood up and said, "Ugh, that one, pay attention."
And that's something I learned when we did our dinner groups, Maymette. That was one of the things that I learned back then, was that it was standard if especially it's usually a young Black man was pulled over. This is before so much of the, what we've seen recently, the publicity. If a young Black man was pulled over, that if a Black woman saw that, she would stop and she would witness. And that was new to me. I didn't know that, but then knowing that gives me an opportunity to recognize that's a way to be an ally.
Absolutely. I just want to go back to something Edie said. And as you were talking, Edie and Pat, I was just thinking, for white people, your racial whiteness is like your PhD or your status or your reputation. Just by virtue of your skin color, you already have that connection. You have that ally because of your white privilege. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
That's well said. Yeah. And your beautiful heart, Maymette, and your beautiful testimony. It helps me understand why you could continue. I think I'm okay saying this, how you could continue to be so loving with Queen Esther.
Okay, that's a whole nother conversation. But interesting, Pat, and I'll share this with the group. Queen Esther was an elderly white woman who was assigned, I'm sure by Pat and Lauren, to be in my group. And she just didn't get it. She just didn't get it. And so I see Edith waving her hand. So is she admitting to something?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm sorry, Pat. Okay, Edith, we got to have a conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about. Nevertheless, she really didn't get the concept of what we were doing and what we were working towards. And because of who I am, and I try to be gracious to people. I try to be kind and loving, but it was the white women in the group that got on me because they said I wasn't hard enough on her. That you're just too kind to her. You just need to talk back. You just need, and also, growing up just growing up Black, and then in a Black church, we're taught, you respect your elders. She was an elderly. So I looked at her, as one of like a mother, in the church kind of thing. So I couldn't be, so harsh to her. But I'm glad that, the ladies did bring that to my attention, because I thought, okay, we're doing this because we're all trying to grow. So I can't let her get away with things that I would normally let my African-American friends get away with. I do need to call her on some things, which it didn't matter. So anyway, but never, it was a great experience, I think, for her and for me.
It's so much fun. This is a personal thing. I'm so sorry, but that's so fun for me, Edie, to hear that Madison recruited you. I would never have met you.
He did. It's true, because I had 3 options for jobs, and this is what happens when you have a circle. I belong to a circle of students and African American professionals, primarily African American professionals, in an organization. They had put together a little group, and we would meet once a year at a conference and just talk to each other. So when it was time for me to graduate, that group of people took me to the side and said, okay, we know that you're being recruited at these places. Here is what you need to ask. Here is what you need to do. Here is how you need to present yourself. I'm a novice. I'm a first generation college person, and a PhD doesn't teach you how to go after, in a world that is alien to you, how to go forward. But because I had that circle and network of people, and I try to still in that circle 50 or 40 years later, for other people, for the young people, I was able to get a job and survive.
And have so much impact on so many people. Sandy said it's time for breakout.
Okay, are we, well, I know we're going to stop the recording, but I want to just thank you. I want to thank you, Maymette, Edith, Brecia, and Pat, for the most amazing learning experience for me. You can never, there's so much to learn. There's just so much to learn. And for not only sharing your stories, but sharing how we can move forward is invaluable.